What's up, crew? My name is Kelsey Lensman, and welcome to Seek the Edge podcast. If you are a first time listener, you tune into an amazing episode because this is the first show that we are bringing a guest on. And that's what I wanted the evolution of this show to be is yes, I'll give you mindset nuggets, but I don't know everything. And what has really changed my life is also hearing stories and hearing other people's mindset tips and what they've been through and how they've navigated to become where they are today. And that's why today you are going to meet one of the most near and dear people to my heart, and her name is Shelby Gonyo. This girl embodies what it means to seek the edge of your comfort zone. And she embodies our mission of really tapping into the God-given potential inside. And I met her over 5 years ago, and I posted something on Instagram about my Move Smart Low Back program, one of the first programs that I launched to help individuals get out of their low back pain and aches and pains, to really help them move smart and understand how to work out of compensation patterns that they might be working in and to be able to train in a really good way. And so she messaged me on Instagram. She wanted to join it. And this girl did not know that 5 years later, she would be competing on a bodybuilding stage. She did not know that 5 years later, she would be at a complete freedom in her nutrition and fitness. She did not know that this girl would become all that she is today through God's grace too. And so I'm excited to share her story. I'm excited to share her mindset nuggets. And if you leave without one thing, I will say that this podcast was not playing because there was so much gold within it. So everybody, welcome Shelby Gonyo to Seek the Edge podcast. Shelb, I am so excited to have you on Seek the Edge podcast. It is a long time coming, and I'm so pumped to get into all this.
It's been a long time since I've been on your podcast. I'm excited.
And I was telling you before, what I want to do, Shelb, in this is take people back to kind of the first version of Shelb that I met way back in the day. And for those that are listening, she has grown not just physically in so many ways, but she's stepped into this version of her that she told me like she didn't even know was possible. And now she not only does it for herself, but she impacts so many other women and girls through something that she never thought that she could do. So, Shelb, can you bring us back? I want to think of Shelb prior to the four-wheeling accident. Give us kind of your background. Were you training a good amount? Like, what did that look like for you back then?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Let me try to encompass this into a condensed version. So I played sports all growing up in high school. I didn't play in college necessarily, and that's kind of where I wouldn't say my demise came, but where I really needed to figure out like what I wanted to
Mm.
do. So I always grew up playing soccer, basketball, like always in that team-oriented environment. And then came college where like I went to a local college. I lived at home. Like I wasn't really interacting with people in the same way that I always had, and I didn't have that kind of team atmosphere. Um, Hence why I started going to the gym. It's obviously a lot of people I think who engage in sports all through their lives are geared towards the gym once they kind of lose that. I was not eating enough. I was overtraining. I mean, I trained at 6 a.m. at least 6 days a week, if not 7 days. Went to class, wasn't barely eating any food, on birth control, which did a whole lord of things to my body. And then come summer 2020, after a bunch of emotional, mental turmoil as well, like just kind of not pouring into myself in the way that I would have liked to pour into myself. I kind of poured all that into other people, and even going to the gym, those things weren't for me at that point in time. It was for all the people around me.
Mm.
So that was kind of the turning point. I hit a point, just before the side-by-side accident where I was like, dude, what are you doing? Why are we doing these things? Like, why are you pouring all of this energy and effort into something that isn't even serving you in any capacity? So follow up, I went and had a side by side accident right before I was doing the low back program with Kelsey, for those of you who are kind of OGs. And I almost didn't do it. And then Kelsey, being the lovely human she is, said, like, Shelb, this is the perfect time to do this. Like, it's going to be fine. If you want to quit, like, we could do that down the road, but I'm not going to let you kind of start there. So, best decision I've ever made. Moved into coaching after the low back program, went through some fat loss phases, did building, and then became a coach myself, which I am loving still. 2 years, over 2 years. I
That's
don't even know.
crazy. It feels so much shorter than that, but it's not. It's crazy. Yeah.
And then decided to do a bodybuilding competition last fall, which has been a goal of mine for like 5 years. So
Mm.
that kind of brings us up till now.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back. You ready? So
Yeah.
you said something in there that I also personally struggled with, and I think that it can be a challenge for many individuals is you said, okay, I was an athlete in high school. I was a part of a team. Usually you have a goal, to win the specific game or to get to this conference final. And then you went from having that to not. So can you bring me back, Shell, back to that mindset that you were in? How did you even know what to do, start training? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges is, okay, I go from having this whole set schedule and they tell me what to do to like, now what the heck am I doing? So how did you work through that? What did that look like for you?
I'm grateful that as a human being, I'm always kind of like, if I'm going into something, I'm kind of, I don't want to say all or nothing because I don't like that mindset, but for me personally, I like to dive into something.
Good.
So coming out of high school, like there was a time period where I really wasn't doing anything in terms of like fitness besides like, pick up basketball or like little things here and there. And then I was lucky enough to have a couple friends who were really into training at the time. Of course, at that point, like I said, people I was trying to please. So I was like, yeah, let me kind of try this out. And then eventually I got comfortable enough to where I was doing it on my own and I was seeing like different results and like how my strength could compound. And it was so like gratifying to me. And again, it wasn't that team mentality, but like when you're in a gym with a bunch of different people, I speak to this as somebody who's in a home gym now, but at a gym with a bunch of different people, like you're in a team. Like, and I know like not everybody in that gym is somebody who is, rooting for you or like doing the things with you, but just to have that competitive quote unquote nature against yourself is something so different than being competitive on a team, honestly. I don't know if
That's
that
good.
answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I'm going to pull us to what you said prior to you were more people pleasing. And one of my favorite qualities about you, Shelb, is you are just a strong woman that you don't deviate for a lot of people, especially with your values. And I saw it a lot during this whole bodybuilding prep is it required another level of you. It required another level of commitment, another level of really staying true to what your goal was and who you wanted to be. So, coming from a people pleasing mentality back then, what did that look like for you to be able to really step into, no, like this is my goal and this is what I'm doing and I'm going to stay strong in that?
It's funny now talking to people who didn't know me before and like my mentality before, and they're like, no, there's no way like you were ever the person that didn't say no to people. Like my not give a shit factor, for lack of better terms, is very high these days. In terms of like just doing things like if it's not, and I don't mean not serving me in a way that's like I'm never gonna do stuff for other people or in that capacity, but in the capacity that if I genuinely like feel it in my gut and in my heart that it's not something that I want to do, like I'm not going to do that. And for me to get to that space, like I had to have a lot of like black and white conversations between my two ears of like why are you showing up in this capacity? Like, why are you doing everything that you do? Like, why is it happening? And really getting transparent of like, hey, are you genuinely doing this for you, or you doing it for other people and to please them? And
Mhm.
in your previous podcast, several years ago, which seems crazy, I talked about like giving your happiness back to yourself and not allowing other people to
Mhm.
trying to get other people to bring you happiness because that's not how happiness works. It's an internal kind of factor. Yes, Adrian can make me happy in different capacities, or you and our team can make me happy in different capacities. But if I'm not leaning into myself and I'm not doing the things for myself, that happiness isn't going to come to me.
Mhm.
It's something you have to like cultivate. And I can't really say the exact moment where I had that like switch. I think it was just little decisions over time of paying attention to what I'm saying to myself and why I'm doing certain things is what kind of compounded to me now, I guess.
That's good. And I know this has been true for me too. Like the times in my life, and it's something, Shelb, that I have to continually check myself because that's more of my nature is to start to move into that people pleasing mentality. So I a lot of times have to be like, okay, Kelsey, you're falling back to your old patterns again, and I think it's important for people to hear that is kind of when you work through that. And even if you're at a spot right now where it's like, no, like I don't deviate for people, you can still revert back, right? And so we want to be really intentional. But what I've seen in you is when you start to really pour into yourself that way, you're showing up so much better for the people that you serve, for Adrian, and you're able to be more you than before. It might have been like, yeah, you might be physically there, but you might not be mentally and emotionally there because you're just basically running on a hamster wheel over and over again. So that's I think is such an important piece of it where it can be like, oh, it feels very selfish. I feel very selfish in doing that. but man, is it selfless when you're able to step into that person and be able to give more. Has that been an experience for you?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And even, even with like the health and fitness side of things, whether it's like work, professional, whatever, people take note of it. Like people are almost, and I don't want to say jealous because that's not the word, and I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, people are jealous of me. But it's like people almost are like, wow, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, you can, and I know you can because I've been that person that felt like they couldn't. And now being in a place where I'm like, I've just accepted who I am, and I've always been in places previously where like I made myself smaller. And being able to, well, I mean, you know me. I'm not very I'm very transparent. I don't really put a shield up for certain people or, transform myself for different groups of people. Yes, there's a time and a place for certain things, of course, but I'm 100% myself no matter who I'm in front of. And I think really realizing for me, like if I'm going to be in a room of people, I want it to be people who I can be myself with. And
Yeah.
if they don't accept that, then that's kind of on them. That's not a me thing. And something I always like to say is you're not that important in this
Yes, yes,
of
yes. Preach it, baby. Come on.
my favorite in the sense of we always worry about what other people are thinking and like, oh my God, I tripped in the hallway. Like everybody must be thinking about that. That went through somebody's brain for 5 seconds. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. Why am I taking up mental capacity for such little things that nobody else is even thinking about? And I think that was also such a game changer for me of like when I'm in a room of people, I'm not really thinking about how they're perceiving me because that's not my job. It's
Mm.
my job to think about how I perceive me. And I think that's been quite honestly one of the biggest like mental ch game changers for me throughout this whole journey.
hmm And you have a client, but we have a client here with XYL that was her number one takeaway. We always at the end be like, okay, like what was really helpful in your journey, just because we like to see and get the feedback from it. And she said that word for when you shared that with her, Shelb, because she was having a little bit issues of going out to restaurants and maybe ordering different things that before she would have ordered, but now she just doesn't feel like it's in alignment. And she just said, when Shelb said, I'm not like, you're not that important. And it's not a negative thing. It's
Yeah,
hey, like you're thinking that this is so much bigger than what it is. You're thinking that Susie and Joe and Frank over there is constantly thinking for the whole night, well, why isn't she doing this? What's going on? It's like they might have a fleeting thought of it, but even if that's a fleeting thought, you're really not that important to be able to make your whole life decisions based on what other people think too.
yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, let's dig into this because I think this is one of the biggest issues. Then I'm going to transition to your bodybuilding journey because that's been awesome.
Yep.
Is if there's somebody out there listening to this that they're like, Shelb, you are preaching, baby. Like this is so good. But man, I don't even know where to start. Or, hey, I know that I have these tendencies, but it can just feel so daunting or so big of, well, you're on this completely other side and I'm starting at square one. What either advice would you give them or actionable step would you give them?
Yeah. So for something like this, and I always say mindset work is the hardest work because it's you can make physical progress and you can do the things, but if you don't change what's going on up here, it's never going to be enough.
Yep.
So I come from a place of like take small steps just with anything else. If it's just one thing throughout the week where you're like, hey, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to say no to that. Say no to that one thing, even if you said yes to 40 other things that you just don't want to do.
Okay.
Start small, like make those little decisions, but also just having the conversation in your head and saying like, hey, do I genuinely want to do this? And that was one of the biggest things for me. Also, like we always talk about make yourself proud at night. Make decisions that when you go to bed, you're going to be proud of the decision you made. So just taking that extra 5, 10 seconds, it doesn't need to be this whole, journal or big conversation in your brain. But when you're making a decision, excuse me, whether it's something you're eating, somebody you're hanging out with, will I be proud when I go to bed that I made this decision or that I made this decision? And when your brain's gonna kick in, you're gonna know immediately what decision's gonna make you prouder. Make that decision. And again, it doesn't have to be with every little thing, but start doing that, and little by little, you're going to automatically do it before you even realize it.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And I'm going to echo you of what you just said. Is she said start small, and she also said you didn't directly say this, but it comes with it is first is just becoming aware, like oh shoot, I do all these things, or man, I do make these decisions because I want to please my mom or my dad or Susie or and so it's that first awareness piece, and like you said, is start so stinking small, where it's is this small decision is eating this cookie or having a well-fueled breakfast? Is that which one's going to make me more proud? And it can feel like in the moment, okay, Kels, this isn't really getting me to my end all be all goal of stop people pleasing. But those will compound. And Michelle, that's what you preach so well. And I'm just so grateful that you lead a lot of our people in that direction is those small steps will compound. And before you know it, you're going to be Shelb 3.0, baby. Like you're going to be this Shelb where she's really confident and strong in her decisions and she's not swaying, but it takes that time and small compounded effort to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of times like recently I've been told like through my new job that I'm like you just come in so confident. And I was like, I never even now like when I'm in this space, like I almost never thought like people would say that about me. And it's funny now even being in a space where like I feel my own confidence in the best way possible. It's funny to have other people like call it out because it's almost still weird. You almost still don't believe it to an extent, but you're living it. It's very interesting.
No, that's good. And to piggyback, the confidence is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I know Shelb, at least in my journey, is there's not this mountaintop moment of when you get this one thing, oh my gosh, all the confidence is bestowed on you, and then you're just walking this yellow brick road for the rest of your life with full confidence. So is that something that you continually work on, or how do you show up as this confident version? And do you struggle with reverting back, or are you pretty good right now?
It depends. There's seasons. I mean, there's never a time where I'm ne always like, yeah, I'm confident and I'm gonna go do the thing. There's a lot of times where I'm just like, yeah, let's try it. Like, there's what am I gonna lose kind of thing. But that's
Okay.
just also my personality to an extent. But in terms of confidence, I think it's something, and I don't like to use the term fake it till you make it, but there's a point where when you're doing something new, you're gonna feel bad at it. And there's an extent where you have to feel not so great at it because you're not. And that's
Mhm.
okay. And I think in a society now, like everything's so instant and we're expected to just be really good at things. And even in again my new job, not to keep bringing that up, but realizing like I'm not good at all the things that I'm learning to do, and I'm okay with that. And I haven't always been that way. So it's really cool now to see it compound to like, oh yeah, I'm okay with being bad at things in all categories of my life. And I think it has to just start in kind of one section. You know, health and fitness is obviously something we talk about,
Mhm.
but be bad at something. Like go be different. I'm learning to play hockey. I am not good at it. I
Mhm.
love it. So
Mhm.
like just having that capacity to give yourself grace and say, hey, I'm not going to learn to ride a bike the first time I get on it.
Mhm.
Kids are not expected to learn to walk the first time they stand up, but it's weird expectation as adults that when we try something, we're expected to be so good at it right away. And you don't have to be. And be
Mhm.
okay with that. Like be okay with not being good.
Oh, preach. Oh my gosh, this is so good because I needed to hear this 10 years ago. I
Hmm.
because what
Oh.
happened with me is if I wasn't good at something, I felt like a failure. And
Mhm.
I identified it. Like it was a part of me versus just something objectively that I wasn't good at. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's so good. So then this is actually a beautiful segue because we talk a lot about obviously the podcast is called Seek the Edge, right? And seeking the edge of your comfort zone. And I want to echo a previous part of this podcast where seeking the edge is not just physical discomfort. We're going to talk through that with your bodybuilding. Like, we're going to talk through that aspect of it. But also seeking the edge of your comfort zone is making those small decisions to not people please in a certain capacity. And that's something that I want to really hit home with people is discomfort isn't just physical. Discomfort can be more emotional. Discomfort can be relational. And that's how we truly evolve as a human, not just a six pack that we see in the mirror. And that's what personally I'm really passionate about is yes, physical health is so important. We obviously really key in on it and it will translate to other areas of your life. But also it's we want to evolve you as a human. Like all of you want to evolve, not just one part of you. And so I want to transition, Shell, because I don't remember the first time that you shared this with me, but it was years ago. It was not just a year ago, where you're like, Kels, I have this crazy idea and it scares me. I don't even know if it's possible, but like I kind of want to do a bodybuilding show.
Mhm.
And it was so funny. The moment you shared it with me, I was like, dude, she can 100% do it. Like she's got this in the bag. But you were like kind of tiptoeing, do I do it? Do I not do it? And I'm not going to fast forward too much, but I want you to go back to that first moment of when you thought of that and then what was going through your brain as soon as that idea or that like thought came up.
Oh yeah. So I'll go back even like, oh my God, it's probably longer than 5 years ago now, which is insane to think about. when I first started lifting, and not honestly like right when I started, but a couple years in when I wasn't really getting progress because I wasn't doing all the right things, I was like, man, I would love to do a bodybuilding competition. And I'm like, absolutely not. That is no way in hell kind of what I'm going for. I can't do that. Like that is not for me. And I sat on that for, like I said, probably 5, 6 years. And I was like, every year I was like, yeah, you could, maybe you could do it. And then I'm like, no, still can't do it. And then I remember having the conversation with you, and obviously we talked through more like logistical side of things. And for everybody who doesn't know, I said everybody like cons, pros to Kelsey. I'm like, these are the things I'm most afraid of. These are the things I'm excited about. Like, I don't know. And then there was one point, I mean, even the day I signed with my coach, like I cried. I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, are you going to be able to do this? And I have a video. I cried and I was like, this is like I signed with my coach today. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, I'm excited. I'm scared. Like, there was so many just emotions, and it seems weird because it's like, oh, it's just a bodybuilding competition, but it's really just a whole different level. And not even knowing it at that point, having gone like not gone through it, it's a whole different level of like commitment and growth, and like knowing what you've poured into your body and almost being afraid that it's not enough was kind of like one of my bigger fears. So that's kind of where it started. I won't go too deep because I'm sure you have more questions, but
Okay, yes, because I'm going to key in on this. Is we shared this with me. This would have been like December of what is it, 25?
Mhm.
December of 23, I think you shared because
Yeah.
last year 24 is when you did it.
Mhm.
And you shared this thought with me, and I was like, Shelby, I was like, brain dump why you want to do it. Because also, and we're not here to advocate bodybuilding for everybody, right? Where it's very specific. You have to have a certain mentality, a certain, way to get into it. But I said, brain dump why you want to do it. Number one, because if it's just for validation from others or your whole worth is in your body, that's just going to be a really poor foundation to get into it. But then you also brain dumped, hey, why don't I? Or what fears do I have with it? And I think identifying the fears or the what I think are cons are so incredibly important because if you don't, then you're just kind of operating in this fight or flight and you're not facing them, you know?
Mhm.
So when you made that list, how was that for you or what kind of pulled to light?
I think so. Something that's really interesting to me is I would have, and being transparent, like I would not have been able to do this 5 years ago when I wanted to do it. And that's not to say hold off on things you want to do, but I knew mentally like I was not in a place to do that. So going through my fear list in December 2023, I was like, wow, this girl's so different than the girl who thought about this initially. And like I know mentally I'm in a place that I can handle it because my fears were all like mundane, if that makes sense. And not that they're not valid, but they were all fears that were like, hey, you'll figure it out on the journey kind of thing. Like it's not going to make or break you throughout this journey. Like I was worried about losing my muscle mass and how I would handle like the all or nothing kind of mentality that goes into prep and certain things of that version, but it wasn't like ooh, I won't get first place or I won't, be the best of the best there. Like that thought almost never even crossed my mind to an extent. Like
Uh-huh.
I just want to be first. I'm a competitive human being, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't like the top of my fear list was like, oh, I'm not going to win, and that solidified for me that that was the right decision.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go in real quick.
Okay.
You said mentally you wouldn't have been ready 5 years ago. What were the differences? I know you touched on it right then, but how did you see yourself of, oh, that girl wasn't ready, and oh, this girl is ready now?
From a physical standpoint, there was also like physical growth. Like I've gained a crap ton of muscle in the past few years, and I'm very proud of that. But also, I mean, this mostly came from a mental standpoint. Like, yes, I looked at my physical progress too, but mentally, like I said, I wasn't pouring into myself at that point, and I was pouring into other people, and it would have just been for the body. It wouldn't have been for myself and like pushing myself to a new capacity. I'd have been like, ooh, I can be the skinniest version or the smallest version of myself, and honestly, that was my biggest fear going into it this time was like, ooh, I don't want to be that small version of myself. Like, and it's so interesting to see like how that would just like completely 180 itself from where I would have been, 5 years ago.
Hmm. Okay,
So interesting.
yeah, it's interesting because Shelby, you talk about it, and I've talked about it too. It's who you become in the process. And this, at least in my opinion, not to put an opinion on your journey, but I've seen this from like outside looking in, is like you had this goal. Yes, the goal was to compete in a bodybuilding show. But what I saw really speak or spark your curiosity was like, who do I have to become to
Yeah.
step on stage? Like what level of commitment? What process am I going to endure? And that was so cool seeing you go through it is you were so process focused versus I mean you had doubts, of course we all do in pursuit of any goal, But you were so, hey, what do I need to do today? And how do I need to execute today versus, oh my gosh, in 6 months, I'm never going to be able to make it there. So talk to me about you signed up with your coach, you had a excitement, but also mental breakdown of like, what the heck did I just do? And then bring me from there up going into the process.
So I had no background in bodybuilding. I mean, quite frankly, like I didn't even watch a bodybuilding show before I signed up for bodybuilding. Like I've seen them on Instagram and like I've seen the people do them. And quite honestly, even up until my show, like I didn't watch another show. And that's not usually recommended for people going through bodybuilding. But like just this is just to say like I was completely like a baby deer going through this whole process. Like I didn't know how to walk, like I didn't know how to run in this process. So it was something like I really had to lean on my coach, and I will 10 out of 10 say like focus if you're ever going to do anything like this, and I don't care what the capacity is, like get to know your team, get to know your coach before you go in the journey.
Yep.
And I was grateful that I had like a good
Yep.
surrounding of people and like a good group of people. There were always times where I was like, "Ooh, some of my values," like, and that's just through the prep. It's not necessarily who you're
Yep.
working with necessarily, but get with somebody you trust and that's going to bring you through a process, and like get to talk to people they've worked with, like do those types of things. And that was big for me. And as I started, but the biggest thing was asking questions. When I started this journey, like I said, I knew almost nothing about bodybuilding. Like I had to go and say, hey, how do I, do this? How do I do that? Like I had the basics of macro tracking and like training and all those things, but it was a completely different version of all of that. So just being open about not knowing and asking the questions was the biggest starting point.
I find it interesting that initially you said like I didn't know all the things. I had never watched a bodybuilding show, and I think that that can hold a lot of people back from signing up for the event, the competition, the starting a new job because they feel like they need to know all the things or kind of get through all of the, well, I know how to do this, I know how to do this, so I might be able to. And you're like, no, we're going to send it. Like I really don't even know what the process is going to include, but I have belief in myself that I can take a step and I can take a step. And then also to piggyback with that is you really relied on somebody that has been through it to help with you through it. And you ask questions. You didn't pretend like you knew it all because you didn't. And I find it so fascinating that number one, you started before you actually knew all the things. I think that holds a lot of people back. But then number two, you just asked so many questions, and it was you gave yourself permission to not know, but to also ask the questions throughout, which I think is so powerful.
Yeah. And I honestly like a lot of that. And I see even in some clients I've had previously, like they're afraid to ask questions. I'm like, you're investing in something that's for you. I like, and I always say this as your coach, like I will never be disappointed in you. Like I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. And I try to really take that when I do things on my own too, because you're literally investing in yourself, and you need to be able to get the full, like I'm going to get the full capacity out of that. Like I'm going to learn as much as I can. And again, that might be a personality thing that I have, but I'm very tangible with facts and data and all the things. But being able to be transparent when I don't feel comfortable about things was also really big. I'm like, hey, like I don't know about that. Like I need to know the reason why we're doing this, because I
Mhm.
don't just want to throw myself into it not knowing, because I've never done it. And
Mhm.
I don't really feel 100% comfortable until I have the details, and then I can, make an educated choice or decision. And that was really big for me throughout the whole bodybuilding journey, honestly.
Yeah, let's get into that part of it
Yeah.
where you were 4 or 5 months into the journey. It required another level of commitment. Like, talk to me about that aspect of it and how you had to level up in ways that maybe before you haven't weren't doing or just wasn't a part of your day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So going through, I mean, you could flex your no muscle in a day-to-day world, but when you get into prep, like you're almost at full capacity to the extent where you don't even have the choice to like make the decision to say no. Like you're just most likely going to say no to something, and that's not in a bad way. And I think a lot of people, the amount of times I heard people say like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, like you can't do that," or like, I really just feel bad. I'm like, I chose this. Like this was my decision to go through this.
Mhm.
And I think that's another kind of mental standpoint that I wouldn't have had 5 years ago, and
Yeah.
I would have just kind of taken all my frustrations out on everybody else. And in the times where I'm like, damn, I really want that ice cream, or like I really want to go, do this thing, but I gotta, walk a mile first and lift and do all the things first. I could still go do that thing. I just got to get a lot of things done first. And I think just having the mindset of I'm gonna execute no matter what, and these things are going to get done as my non-negotiables. And there was a lot of them. Come deep into prep, there was a lot of them, but it also allowed me to realize how great my capacity was and how big my capacity was for things. Because we go through day to day and say, oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. And we don't realize how much we're on this thing, how much we're just kind of floating through. I could watch a whole Netflix series in a day. Like, there's a lot of things you don't realize that you're giving so much of your time and energy to. And I like to speak to it in terms of energy because I feel like that's relatable to people. And a lot of my clients recently, I'm like, you're pouring so much energy into things you have no capacity for or control over. And then by the time you get to the things that you have to do, your energy's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no energy to pour into that. And I think that's something prep really taught me. You understand it beforehand, but when you really just have to do it, you realize how much of your energy you're pouring into different things that don't really give you any benefit.
Mm-hmm. And for those that are listening, I know Shelby's talking about her bodybuilding journey, but it's not just bodybuilding. I've seen this with myself, with our clients of whenever you have any specific goal, it's going to come down to these mindset what goes through your mind and you learning these just principles that Shelby, yes, prep taught you, but you can translate to every area. And you said too, you said number one is ownership. Like you took ownership of like, hey, I made this decision. And just because at times I don't want to do it, or man, this is really hard, like, no, this was my decision. And
Yeah.
that puts the control back in your court versus you just kind of getting it out on everybody else or certain circumstances that made it hard. Like, no, I made the decision. So I think that's number one, really big. Second thing you talked about is like just doing your hard things first. You don't have to be not a fun human. Like you still went out, had fun with your friends, you still did things, but hey, I gotta knock off my non-negotiables first, which then allowed me to do those. And that coincides beautifully, Shell, with what you talked about is like going to bed proud is
Mhm.
when you know you went to bed and you did the things that you know that you needed to do and also wanted to achieve whatever goal that you have, whether that be bodybuilding, fitness, business, whatever that is, that alignment is huge. And then last but not least, I'm going to pull into is you talk about like extremity creates capacity, where when you are doing something that is pushing, this is perfect, pushing you to the edge. Like the same stuff that Shelb was doing 10 months ago, she probably can't do, now as we're really seeking that edge and kind of pushing that capacity. And a lot of people might think, oh my gosh, it's too much. Like I can't do all of this. But what
Mhm.
I'm hearing from you, and I've experienced this too, is when you have a good amount on your list, and I'm not saying just create random tasks to put on your list. But when you are doing something that is going to make you level up in a way, oh my gosh, does that show you actually how much time you're probably wasting? And then also what you're actually capable of there, which I think is such a cool takeaway, Shelb, that now you're able to take away in every single aspect of your life now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in my schedule, like during prep, like I felt like my schedule was insane, but I felt the most intentional I've ever felt, honestly, probably my whole life about doing things because I wasn't wasting the time. Like I knew what I was doing. I was excited to do the things because I knew like I was pouring into that time for me. And then like when I was with Adrian, like I was really invested in that time because I knew it wasn't like long lived, if you will. Like we had time together and that was kind of scheduled out to an extent. I was so much more invested in that because I knew like I didn't have all the time in the world to just go do whatever I wanted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people get afraid of that full level of commitment towards something because they feel like it's going to take away from other areas of their life. But what I'm hearing you say is, hey, when I committed, yeah, maybe all my time, I don't have hours and hours to spend, but that's created more intentionality. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I don't know, for example, like Adrian and I would sit on the couch and I like we do it now. We've kind of fallen into that bad pattern. Like we talk about it's not always, 100% we're doing all the right things. Like we'd sit and play on our phones on the couch and not really like think about what we were doing. And like then the time when we only had a few hours together, like we would go do something that we enjoyed or we would like make our most time of it. And that's even with my friends. Like there was certain nights where they were going to dinner and I was like, oh, like I can't really eat out. Like what am I gonna do? And then I'm like, you know what? It's time with your friends. Like you'll still have a good time even if you're just sitting there drinking a water. And like I would go and I would sit with my friends and just have a water, but it was time where you were able to still just hang out with people and it's just so much more intentional and I don't really know how to explain it other than that, but
Yeah.
you're not just going through the motions of things.
Yeah.
You have to be paying attention because it's gonna be gone if you don't. And that's in the best way possible.
Exactly. And so as you got to the actual bodybuilding day and like weeks leading up to it, how were you feeling? Were you nervous, excited? What the heck am I getting myself into? Like, what was that experience for you?
There were so many people that were like, "Wow, aren't you nervous?" And I was like, honestly, like I feel so good because I know I've done the work that I have to do, and like I'm only gonna show up as good as the work I've done to an extent, and I'm really proud of all the work I've put in. So like it was almost impossible for me to feel like scared. I think there was obviously like a little bit of nerve stepping on stage. Like I blacked out throughout my whole like original show, like my routine. And then after that, like it was awesome. Like it was such an experience because I knew stepping on that stage, like I did everything I could. I practiced my posing as much as I could, and let me tell you, that was a whole different beast. Talking about things you know nothing about. Let me tell you, if you don't ever flex your lats, it's a very hard thing to learn. But like I almost couldn't be nervous because I was so proud of everything I had built.
Mm, hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I went to her show and just seeing her exude this confidence, and confidence didn't come from just how she looked. It came from like you, I could feel it, Shelb, in you. It came from the hours and days and weeks and months of hard work that you put into being on that stage. And that was something that I experienced where that day was not just about getting pretty up in a bikini and getting a fake tan, looking like beef jerky. It was a day for me to look back on all the moments that I wanted to quit, give up, the moments where I'm like, is this even worth it? The moments where I had to push through a really hard workout. And it was this feeling of, I'm just so proud of myself. And it had nothing to do with just what I looked like in the mirror. It had everything to do with me showing up for myself and fully following through that journey. And it's like, if I could give that feeling to people of, like, this is what it feels like if you don't give up, it's almost hard for me to communicate because it's such an impactful feeling.
It's so, and you don't know it till you know it. And then like I've hit a lot of good goals in my life, and again, not that bodybuilding's my end all be all, but
Yeah.
you pour so much time, so much effort, so much like almost like love into the journey. And that sounds kind of like, ooh, whatever. But it's just such a feeling like stepping on that stage. And I am not a girly girl by any means. Like the glitz and glam is like one thing. Like, yeah, it's kind of fun, but
Mhm.
it's just the thought of like I created this, like I morphed myself into this, and like
Yeah.
it just shows you being able like physical appearance and like mental growth isn't something that's just given to you. Like you can't just go to a store and buy something, and as much as many people think you can, and it's going to change your whole perception or appearance, you have to fight for every ounce of that. And I think that's why, like, physically, why bodybuilding is so gratifying, because you can't do it for me. You can give me all the tools and all the materials and all the, X, Y, and Z. But if I don't go out and execute it, like that's on me. And
Mhm.
I think that's why this journey in itself was so gratifying. Like you said, it's cool. Abs were fun for like 30 seconds. I've gained, 20 pounds since prep and I feel great. But
Yeah.
like knowing that for me, it wasn't about the body at that point. It was about what I could transform into and like the dedication I could give to it. And it's just such a different capacity. Like you said, you almost can't explain it because until you go through like how fulfilling it could be, you know?
Yeah. And it sounds like the degree that the hard work that you put in was also the excitement and feeling and proud, like just that, man, I freaking did this thing. And I think we're inherently wired, not I think, I mean, this is literally physiology and our just how our brain works is we're wired to want easy because easy means like, okay, I'm safe. Like people think like, oh man, it's so hard for me. And it's like, yeah, well, it is because our brain is wired for comfort. Our brain is wired for, sitting on the TV and scrolling on Netflix because you're safe.
Uh-huh.
But it also doesn't mean you're thriving. Just because we're surviving doesn't mean we're thriving. And so what I'm hearing from you is, man, that was a lot of hard work. Man, that was a lot of effort. Man, that was a lot of just intentionality and learning about myself, but also to the degree that I pursued that challenge was the degree that I felt this happiness and fulfillment and feeling proud of myself that I created that. And I think for people to really take that away, it's not just bodybuilding. It could be, like I said, business, it could be a powerlifting, it could be whatever that is for you. But it takes going all in. It takes you putting in the effort day in and day out and really leveling yourself up and not just kind of one day doing it the other day. And if you keep showing up to that capacity, like that feeling is there, but you have to persist through. And I really just want Shell people to take that away
Mhm.
because that it can be so incredibly powerful if you can get that in your noggin.
Oh, 100%. And even like post prep, like it almost gives you like, and you come, and this is part of the mindset piece, and I don't know if I'm going to explain this well enough for how I feel it, but being able to like put yourself in that capacity and know how much you're capable of. Like now, if I'm not doing things, I'm like, ah, okay, Shab, like you're kind of slacking on it, but it doesn't come from a place of like disappointment in myself. It doesn't come from a place of, you know, poor body image or anything of that capacity. It just comes from a place of like, hey, I know you're capable of more. And that's okay that you're in this season where you're not necessarily feeling that and needing to do that. Like I'm learning a new skill. I haven't been in the gym in a couple weeks, if I'm being honest, like being transparent about things. But I know like I'm in this season, like I'm learning a new skill, like I'm learning to play hockey. I got a new job and not using those as excuses because I know when I want to turn it on, like, hey, Shelb, like, hey, if I need to change something or I'm uncomfortable,
Yeah.
I have that ownership. I know I can make decisions that are going to be better for me. But right now, like I'm okay with having a little bit of leniency, but also coming from a place of I know my capacity. Like I know I can amp it up tenfold if I want to. And it just puts you in a different place of progress and like how you make progress. And
Mhm.
again, I don't know if I'm explaining this in the way that I hope I can. But just mentally puts you in a better place looking at progress, if that makes
hmm
sense.
No, you actually explained that beautifully because I completely understand that and I get that. And what I'm hearing from you, and it sounds like this through your whole bodybuilding journey, but it also right now is you're operating, and this is going to sound cheesy, but I don't mean this to sound cheesy, is like you're operating from a place of love versus a
Yeah.
place of hate. Is like, Shelb, I know that I'm capable of this, and I know that my capacity is this. Doesn't mean every single day you're going to operate to that capacity, but it's like wanting to truly see yourself continually evolve and improve in the different areas, not because you hate where you're at or you hate yourself, but because it's like, man, like I love myself so much that I want to keep growing into these next versions of me. Is that it?
That is 100%. And I feel like that's something that I try to teach every client. And it's something that's so hard to teach
Yeah.
because again, it's that mental capacity where you have to kind of switch it off. And so many women, and I'm sure there's men too, but speaking specifically to women, we just want to have like way less, or we want to do X, Y, and Z. And if it comes from a place of hating like your body or a certain part of your body or whatever, it is going to take you 10 times longer to get there than it is if you just come from a place of like, hey, I like my body and I appreciate it so much that I want to give it. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you don't want to change it because you could still want to change physical appearance and that's fine. And I feel like that's also a weird kind of like illusion that people think they can't have as physical goals.
hmm
The thing is, it needs to come from a place of love rather than a place of just hating your body. Because again, it's going to take you so much longer if you're just constantly like, oh, well, I didn't do this again, and I failed at this, and I couldn't do that. Your body's trying to cool you back down. Like you need to step up to that and step up to those expectations of not letting everything outside of you get in the way of your own goals.
Have you always been like that?
No, not at all. I would say that's probably to an extent, yes. Like I said, I like to dive into things 100%. But to the extent of like leaning into myself like that, I would say that's probably in the past, really the past 3 years that I felt like really confident in it.
What switched for you of operating from a place of, and it's not that you hated yourself, but operating from
Yeah.
a place of kind of that negative energy to now I'm just going to say positive energy for the best way to describe it. Like what led to that or what transitioned from that?
I feel like for me, and again, I feel like I'd have to think about this more because I'm sure there's more to it. You almost like forget longer in your journey, which I hate that I do.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the biggest thing for me was when I was putting so much time and energy into the gym and, what I thought was right nutrition at the time. And I wasn't seeing a lot of changes. And then I started like lifting heavier and I started eating the right foods. And I was like, ooh, like you're making progress and like you're feeling good. I went from being 102 pounds to like 130 pounds. And I felt so much better at the 130 pounds than I ever did at the 102 pounds. And I think we put so much weight, no pun intended, on like things like the scale and whatever else that people could think of, but just being able to see how much like the effort I was putting in was changing my body in a way that was so positive and coming from a place of like, ooh, I'm gonna push this a little harder and see what else I can hit. And it just slowly transformed from a place of like physical progress to a place of like mental growth and the physical progress that I liked came from the mental growth as like a byproduct.
hmm
So I
That
don't know if it's really a moment, but
that hits so deeply with me because and I can't remember where this comes from, but like moving away from pain or moving towards pleasure. It's kind of a very similar concept of moving away from, oh, I really don't like this about myself to, man, I love myself so much that I'm not going to settle. And for those that are listening, you're like, okay, Kelsey, it sounds amazing. I would love to operate at a place of love, but like I just don't know how to get there. And at least this was my experience too, Shelb, of at when I first started, I didn't like what I looked like in the mirror. And that's just being very transparent and being very open about it. And if I'm being really honest, I did operate from a, hey, I'm going to the gym because I don't want to look like this and I don't want to feel like this. And we don't want to operate there forever. But I think if you're at that spot, like that's okay right now, as long as we're not continually beating ourselves up and being like, oh my God, I ate this one cookie. My whole life's, terrible now. So I think if you're at that spot, one, you're not alone because Shelby and I were both there, but also knowing that you're ideally not going to operate from that place forever. And the goal is to, as you continue to grow, work towards that. Man, I'm proud of myself. And man, I love myself too much to settle or to go back to my old patterns. And I just want to give that person hope that it's going to come and it takes time and it takes keeping promises to yourself. And eventually you're going to get to operating to a place of, hey, pleasure. I want to see these things versus, man, I really don't want to feel this way.
yeah. And this, and we kind of talk because we've been in this journey a long time and it's something like we focus on and we're pretty ingrained in. But this isn't to say that I never look in the mirror and I'm like, ooh, Shelb, like you don't love that about yourself. And that's okay. Like you're always gonna have that, but it's how you respond to it that's a little bit different than maybe how I would have responded to it, 5 years ago. And it's not that I hate my body. It's just like, ooh, like you kind of letting things go or letting like certain things flip that you're like, oh, I gotta go and make that good again. And it's not to weigh less or to be skinnier or maybe do certain things, but it's like, oh, like I've kind of let that slip and I'm gonna take ownership of that, not, oh, you really let yourself go and you're just kind of on this path and you're just gonna be like this forever and I'm too old to do this or whatever the excuses are, like just kind of allowing yourself to say, hey, you're kind of not in your shit right now. The only thing you can do better is show up for yourself today and then tomorrow and then the next day and just take it a little bit at a time because I'll start again on Monday and revamp everything is a mindset that will never work. And I used to do that all the time. So that's why I tell you it will never work.
Yeah.
Start small, like drink your water. Cool. That's a great first step. Like do little things that are going to compound. And I feel like so many people don't put enough weight into those things. Get enough sleep. Everybody's like, oh, well, that's just not meant for me. I'm like, well, I could tell you if you got enough sleep, you would see a lot of progress. So
Yeah.
also leaning on people who have been through the journey
Yeah.
and like kind of have that expertise because like I said, when I first started, I thought I was doing all the right things. Like I was eating, chicken and rice and I was lifting weights and it didn't get me anywhere. And it just felt so good to have guidance. I had Coach Navi when I first started and you as my guides. It felt so good to see progress and I was doing the right things.
Mhm.
But I also had to put the effort into it. I had to be strategic and know how much energy to put into certain things. And it's just a balancing act, but it starts small and it seems big because we're talking about kind of bigger picture things. But I didn't get here by doing all the big things to start. I started by, like I said, drinking my water and not just eating coffee for breakfast and,
Mhm.
little things like that, that really long term will change the whole game.
Oh, I could talk to you about this stuff forever.
I
And
could
I really
too.
want to make this a 2 hour podcast, to be honest with you, even though I know you got to go. Um, what do you think, Shell? And I'm going to get a little bit more open and vulnerable with you, and you can take this as deep or as surface level as you want. What do you think is your biggest challenge right now?
Right now, speaking kind of still, I like to say I'm still post prep, even though it's been several months. Biggest thing for now is kind of like reigniting that fire after prep. And if I'm being fully transparent, like I said, my gym schedule hasn't really been consistent and hasn't been, and it's really kind of a hard balance going from that all or nothing, which was kind of my biggest gripe about prep is I like to preach like, hey, we're not in an all or nothing mindset. Like anything's better than nothing. Like I want you to live up to that version of yourself, but also like you can do, not everything has to be done. So that's been the biggest thing for me recently is finding what that next thing is. And I have a wedding in September and I have all these things coming up, but it's like what's kind of driving me right now and what's that why behind it?
Yeah.
And that's been my biggest challenge, honestly, over the past few months.
Oh, I feel that. It was really hard after because you go from having this once again it kind of pulls this whole podcast beautifully full circle because you were part of a team, you had a goal, you had a really specific focus, and then when that kind of went away, it's like, okay, now what? And it's very similar to at least I experienced in this bodybuilding journey too, where it's like you have a specific date, you have a goal, you have to be pretty dang much all in on that goal, and then it's like, okay, like now what?
Hmm.
And you've transitioned beautifully too. Like, okay, there are different areas that I want to grow in. But I also think that when you view yourself as an athlete, it's still really important to pursue something physical. It doesn't mean that you need to have a specific date on the calendar, but like that's a big part of you. And you've transitioned that to hockey, which is
Yeah.
beautiful. But for those that are listening, I want to really encourage you of like when you get yourself physically good too, man, is that going to translate in so many different areas of your life. And I think that's just such an important aspect to it too.
Yeah, that transfers into like my new career and all the things. And
Yeah.
like you said, I'm kind of pouring into a few different buckets right now, and I'm grateful for that. And we always talk about, you can't pour into everything at once or you'll lose yourself. And,
Hmm.
if everything's important, nothing is important.
Hmm.
So right now I've kind of accepted the season of, I'm pouring into my professional life and I'm pouring into learning hockey and, I still weight train and stuff, fairly consistently, but it's not perfect. But also owning up to, there is different seasons and different buckets to pour into too that might come at different times. So
Yeah.
being okay with that too.
Yeah. What is thinking of yourself December 31st, 2025? So the end of this year. What is one thing you want to look back on, and be like, dang, I'm so proud of myself for this thing?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think sticking to who I am, and I know that sounds funny because that's kind of what this whole podcast has talked about of like, oh, like you've developed this person and you've become this person that isn't afraid to say no or do the things. Like I want to stick to that. And I feel so proud that I've built a version of myself that like, yes, I always want to level up 1000%. Like that's always my goal. But honestly, this year I'm like, you've built such a strong version of yourself that you feel so confident in that
Yeah.
I want you to almost like maintain her. And not that I can't level up or do new things, but I'm at a place like again, prepping for wedding and getting a new job where I'm like, I want to pour into those a little bit, but I want to bring myself into those things and I don't want to lose her who I've built over the past few years. So I think this year, not that I don't need a big ass goal or have like these crazy things, but it's like almost like maintaining who I've become and
Yeah.
pouring that into every other aspect of my life than just health and fitness.
100%. Yeah, 100% makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen you like you had a big level up year last year. Like it was massive in multiple areas, not just the bodybuilding, right? And I think I fell into this trap, Shub, a lot is next goal, next goal, next goal, next goal. I need something on the calendar. And it was operating out of this like fight or flight mode of
Yeah.
if I don't have the next thing on the calendar, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all the things.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such a beautiful thing that you're leaning into this year where you're just so aware. I did this way young. I did this early 20s. You're just so much more aware than I was because it was just this putting things on the calendar just because I thought I needed it to continually do the things that I was doing. And I went through a season of like, okay, I'm not putting anything on the calendar. And I'm going to see if I can really keep those standards in my life without this like dangling this thing in front of my face and putting a deadline with that. And through that, and that was a really important part of my journey, but through that, I also learned of I love competing and I love doing different things. And so I just want to echo what you said of there's different seasons in a person's life. And I think the self-awareness that you have, man, I wish I had that 10 years ago because you're able just to really pour into and lean into the areas that you want to grow. And also you're not settling. Like yes, you're maintaining this version of you, but you are really pouring into your relationship and your career. And people don't see those aspects of leveling up. Like they don't see that aspect of discomfort and seeking the edge. And yes, we're all about, pushing physical limits because I think that really opens you up to what you're capable of, hence your whole journey last year. But then it is continuing to seek the edge of becoming all that you can be in these different areas. And that's what you're literally living that out this year, as last year was a big physical year for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a different ball game. Like I said, learning your schedule and stuff when you don't have to be doing certain things
Yeah.
and And not that I had to in prep, it was my decision, but I knew I was going to step on stage as the version I wanted to or the version I didn't want to be. And that wasn't really a question for me.
Yeah.
So now in this season, it's just balancing like, hey, where do you want to be physically? Do you want to maintain? Do you want to do some different things? And just navigating that. But I have all the tools to do all the things. So being able to implement those and actually follow through with them, like you said, without a big thing hanging above my head, is it's really interesting and it's fun now. Like it's a fun phase to be in because you learn so much about yourself through something like prep. But in a season like this, you almost learn more because you learn, your different dedications and those types of things. So I'm really like leaning into that. And I'm hoping that throughout this year too, I can share more of that journey on even like my Instagram and stuff so other people see that it's not just this one big physical goal. It's a lot of different growth and I'm learning how to express that and like how to share that with people, but it's really easy from the outside looking in to say like, oh, well, she doesn't have kids or she doesn't have this or she doesn't have X, Y, Z. Every person's going to do that. I work two jobs. I have two dogs that are very high maintenance. I have Adrian who's high maintenance. I have, we have ducks and chickens. Like there's a lot of things. Like I could go on a list of things that I do that other people don't. And I could either use those as excuses or use them as reasons to kind of go next level. And I think that's a big thing through a lot of people's journey. So I encourage you to have that reflection with yourself and just say, like, hey, am I leaning into things that are like excuses or am I leaning into things that could actually serve me
Mhm.
in the next year?
Mm. So I just want to acknowledge you as we pull this back. And I'm going to ask you one more question with this, but I just want to acknowledge you. And it is one of the coolest things and biggest blessings in my life to see somebody evolve and grow as much as I've seen you evolve and grow. And it's crazy. I get goosebumps thinking about this of when you first sent me that Instagram message like 5+ years ago and you bought my camo movement long
I
sleeve
still have
shirt. You
it.
took a picture of it and yeah, like and it's so crazy to me. That's not crazy because in my opinion it's a God thing. Like and he's put this desire and pursuit in your heart of seeing that girl and it literally coming full circle to you did the low back program, then you did coaching, now you're a coach, and now like you've achieved things that the version of you 5 years ago wouldn't have even entered freaking tamed.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to acknowledge you for that because you've had the courage to pursue, you've had the commitment to endure, and you've had the giving heart to give to every single other person through what you're going through and through the lessons that you've learned. And that's just such a special thing that selfishly I'm really grateful to have you, not just a part of our team, but just to have you as a friend and to have you as somebody that just inspires me of like, man, Shelb's killing it. Like, oh man, I got to step up to the plate too. And that's just special. So I just want to say thank you for being you. And it's been such a blessing to see you grow throughout that entire journey.
Well, I can only give a lot of the credit to you.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Just finding, and I think that's such a like you just even talking about that, like finding people you're not competing with in a way that's negative, but finding people that are actually encouraging you to say, like, hey, I want to do better for myself because like they're crushing it. Like I know I have that next level version of me. And that is something I love so much about XYL and just the group that we have is there's no competition between people here. Like you're growing yourself while other people are growing themselves. And it's such a unique environment. And I come from a small community where everybody knows everybody. Like there's not a lot of that in terms of like grow for growth. It's a grow to compete kind of thing. And I think, just what you talked about, like leaning into those groups of people. Kels, I could say I would not be where I am today without you. And I think a lot of people would echo that. But being in a spot where you have people who are genuinely just fighting for you and want that best version of you, not for money or not for, fame or whatever it is. And I will say, if you take one thing away from this podcast, hopefully you take more, is lean into the people that truly believe in you and truly want to see you grow, and come from a place of love from that, because you're only going to grow if you surround yourself with people who are that. So I hope that's something people take away from this.
Which puts us in a great last question is, Shelv, if you, God forbid, amen that you don't, but if you went away tomorrow and there was no, and I got this from Lewis Howes, and I just love this last question, so I'm not going to pretend like it's my own. But if you had none of your social media to leave behind, none of your texts, your podcast, like anything, what three lessons or three things or quotes would you want to give to other people?
Oh God, I should have, you asked me if I want to have these questions beforehand. I said no, but I feel like I should have said yes. Um, I feel like the biggest thing for me is, and I don't know if this will be three things or one thing, but leaning into who you are as a human being and not allowing things to like capitalize on that, if that makes sense. Like being the person you are in every room. And I know I talked about that earlier, but there is no better feeling than being able to be yourself everywhere. And I mean like fully yourself. Like I've been in rooms where like, oh, you're too loud or you do this or you do that. And like I'm in a phase in my life where that doesn't bother me anymore. You have one life, like you said, you could be gone tomorrow and you have no idea what the world holds or how long,
Yeah.
God willing, you're able to be here. So being able to live a life that is genuinely for you, and again, that doesn't mean you can't help other people. That I love helping other people. I love guiding other people, but having the capacity to know that you've lived the best life for yourself that you can. And if that means, going into a little bit of debt or, doing something that feels uncomfortable or whatever, again, don't like blow your life savings or anything like that, but being able to make those trips or see those people or, take the time off work, that is a big thing. Like having the capacity to have freedom in your life and allow yourself to be okay with that and like not just fear everything that's going on of like, oh, I can never get on a plane because I'm terrified. Like, yeah, it can be scary, but you could also have the best time of your life on the other side of that flight. So just having the capacity to want what you want and go after it and be the version of yourself that you want to be, because why are we wasting time when it's not promised. Time is the only thing we have no control of. So why are we worried about it? Just do the things you want to do, kind of thing. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'm gonna mic drop you there. That was gold. That was good gold. Well, Shelb, I appreciate you coming on. This is a long time coming. Everybody's been asking, I want to know about Shelby's bodybuilding journey. So I was like, all right, the first guest I'm having on is Shelb. And I just appreciate you giving your time, not only just to this podcast, but just everything that you do and how you lead. I think it is something that if you're not following her, we'll put your social on the podcast notes. Go follow her, and you will see her lead from the front and lead by example, which, in my opinion, is the biggest way to lead. So, thank you. And then, everybody else, thank you for tuning in and just really taking some nuggets. And I'm going to encourage you to think of the one thing that, I mean, there's 20 plus things in this podcast, but what is the one quote, the one message, the one thing that really hit home? And I'm going to encourage you to message Shelby it. So, Shelby, what's your social? Because I want to hear all the amazing takeaways that people are getting.
Yeah, social is ShelbG_fit. It should be very easy to find.
And I'll get her. I will put it below. So go ahead, screenshot, take a moment to message Shelba on this, and I'll see y'all soon. Thank you.